Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I'm a software engineer and I spend most of my days buried in code. About 2 years ago, I landed this job at a tech startup downtown, and it's been pretty good to me. The work is challenging, the pay is decent, and my co-workers are actually cool people. The only downside is that our office can get pretty chaotic sometimes, especially when we're pushing deadlines. That's how I discovered my little sanctuary at the Starbucks 2 blocks away from work. This Starbucks has become my second office. The baristas know my order by heart, the Wi-Fi is solid, and there's this perfect corner table where I can spread out my setup. I've been going there almost daily for the past year and a half, and I've even made friends with some of the staff. It's become routine. Grab my usual large cold brew, set up my laptop, and code in peace for a few hours. Sometimes my co-workers join me there for informal meetings or just to hang out after work. My laptop is my pride and joy. I saved up for months to buy this gaming laptop because I needed something powerful enough to handle both my work projects and my personal coding experiments. It wasn't cheap, but it was worth every penny. The thing runs like a dream, handles heavy development environments without breaking a sweat, and yes, it can run games too, though I rarely have time for that. So there I was last Tuesday, sitting at my usual spot, working on a database optimization problem. I had my headphones on, completely absorbed in my code, when I noticed some movement near the entrance. A woman walked in with her kid, maybe around 8 or 9 years old. The kid immediately zeroed in on my setup and started walking over. I pulled off my headphones and looked up when the kid asked what I was doing. The kid seemed curious, not hostile, so I figured I'd be polite and told him I was working. The kid thought it was cool and wanted to know if the laptop could play Fortnite. Honestly, it was a fair question. The laptop does look pretty gaming-oriented with its sleek design and RGB keyboard lighting. I said that yes, it could run the game. That's when his eyes lit up like Christmas morning. He got super excited and asked if he could play Fortnite on it right then and there. Now, I'm not great with kids, but I tried to be nice about it. I apologized and told him I had work to do so he couldn't use it. Big mistake. The kid instantly shifted from excitement to rage and started screaming at the top of his lungs that I wasn't letting him play Fortnite and calling for his mommy. Every single person in the coffee shop turned to look at us. I felt my face getting hot with embarrassment. The baristas behind the counter stopped what they were doing. Even people with headphones were pulling them off to see what was happening. That's when Karen, and trust me, she was definitely a Karen, came walking over like she owned the place. She demanded to know how I dared to deny her child's enjoyment. I tried to stay calm and reasonable, explaining that I had simply told her son that he couldn't play on my laptop. Karen wasn't having it. She yelled that her little angel deserved to play whatever game he wanted, and that her husband was a lawyer. Of course he is, I thought. They always are. I told her that I didn't care what her husband did for a living, and that I wasn't going to give her my laptop. The kid started up again, even louder this time, whining that he wanted to play. Karen escalated further, threatening to call the cops on me if I didn't hand over the laptop. That's when one of the baristas, this really nice guy who always remembers my order, stepped in. He told Karen that she needed to leave the building. Karen was having none of it. Her voice got even louder as she said that she wouldn't leave until she got the laptop. Then she called me a little brat and said I didn't deserve such a fancy machine. Did she just call me a brat? I'm 23 years old, working a full-time job and paying my own bills. That really got under my skin. I pointed out that she was screaming and mentioned that I was surprised her husband hadn't gotten a divorce yet. I probably shouldn't have said that, but I was getting pretty fed up. Karen got red in the face, and I could see the veins popping out on her forehead. That's when things went completely off the rails. She lunged forward and grabbed my laptop right off the table. I instinctively reached for it, trying to get it back. That's when she kicked me square in the face. I stumbled backward, and she lost her grip on the laptop. It crashed to the floor with a sickening crack. I touched my nose and my hand came away bloody. I looked down at my laptop and the screen was completely shattered. Spiderweb cracks running across what used to be a pristine display. That laptop represented months of saving, countless hours of work, and now it was destroyed because some entitled woman couldn't control her kid. I completely lost it and started yelling at her, calling her a stupid witch and threatening to call the police. Karen shot back with a racist slur, calling me fat and using a derogatory term for Indians. The whole coffee shop went dead silent. Even her kid stopped whining. I'm not even Indian. But that didn't matter. The racism was just a cherry on top of this disaster. The nice barista announced that the police had already been called and were on their way. He warned Karen not to leave the premises. I noticed another barista had quietly locked the front door. Karen was trapped, and she was starting to realize it. The barista also mentioned that everything had been caught on the security cameras, so Karen wasn't going anywhere. Karen went from red to pale in about 2 seconds. She started looking around frantically, probably planning her escape route, but there wasn't one. The police showed up about 5 minutes later. They took statements from everyone, reviewed the security footage, and arrested Karen on the spot. Assault, property damage, attempted theft. She was looking at serious charges. The kid was crying, but honestly, I felt bad for him. None of this was his fault. About an hour later, a man showed up who turned out to be Karen's husband. He looked absolutely mortified when the police explained what had happened. He kept apologizing to me, to the baristas, to basically everyone in sight. He took the kid home while Karen was being processed at the station. I pressed charges, obviously. My laptop was destroyed, I had medical bills from the broken nose, and I'd been publicly humiliated and racially abused. The case was pretty straightforward with all the witnesses and security footage. 3 months later, Karen was sentenced to 90 days in jail and ordered to pay me $4,000 in damages. The husband actually paid it immediately and threw in an extra $1,000 for my trouble. Apparently, this wasn't Karen's first time with entitled behavior, and he was already filing for divorce. I used the money to buy an even better laptop, and I still go to that same Starbucks almost every day. The baristas always ask how I'm doing, and sometimes people recognize me as the laptop guy and want to hear the whole story. The kid never showed up again, but I hope he's doing okay with his dad. When it comes to Karen, I heard she moved out of state after getting out of jail. Good riddance. My husband and I moved into this apartment complex about 4 years ago when we were newlyweds. The rent was affordable, and it was close to his work. The walls were incredibly thin. You could literally hear someone dropping a spoon next door. Our neighbors back then were amazing. They'd lived there for years and understood the situation. We all kept our voices down, played music at reasonable volumes, and treated each other with respect. When my husband and I had our intimate moments, we learned to be very quiet. When they watched TV late at night, they kept it low. We could have full conversations through the walls if we wanted to, but we respected each other's privacy. It was like having roommates who happened to live on the other side of a wall. Then I got pregnant. Our neighbors were so excited for us, they'd ask through the walls how I was feeling and even offered to help with baby stuff. When our son was born 2 years ago, they were considerate about noise levels because they knew babies need their sleep. But then everything changed. The husband next door inherited about $300,000 from a relative. They were over the moon and decided to buy a house in the suburbs. I was happy for them, but also worried about who would move in next. The apartment stayed empty for about 2 months. Then these two guys moved in, fresh out of college, probably around 22 or 23 years old. From day one, I could tell they were going to be a problem. The first week they moved in, they threw a massive party on a Tuesday night. Music so loud that our windows were vibrating. My son was only 6 months old at the time, and my husband had to be up at 6 in the morning for work. He's a teacher, so he works long days from 7 to 6. I waited until about 11 at night before I decided to do something. I walked over and knocked on their door. I introduced myself and explained that I had a baby trying to sleep and my husband had work early the next morning. I asked if they could maybe turn the music down a bit. The taller one looked me up and down with a smirk. He told me they paid rent just like I did and could do whatever they wanted in their apartment. When I tried to explain that the walls were really thin and the previous tenants had always worked with us to keep noise reasonable, the shorter one laughed from behind his friend. He said they weren't the previous tenants and suggested I should invest in some earplugs. Then he called me a hag. They literally turned the music up louder and slammed the door in my face. I went back to my apartment where my husband was trying to calm our crying baby. My husband asked what they had said, and I told him they called me a hag and turned the music up even louder. My husband's face went red, but he's not the confrontational type. Instead, I decided to call the police non-emergency line. When the cops showed up about 20 minutes later, I explained the situation. The officer was really understanding and said they'd talk to them about the noise ordinances that were in effect after 10 p.m. on weekdays. I watched through my peephole when the officer knocked on their door. I could hear the conversation through the thin walls. The officer told them about the noise complaint and said they needed to turn the music down or off. The tall guy protested that it wasn't even that loud, but the officer said he could hear it clearly from the parking lot and told them to turn it down immediately or face a citation. They finally turned it off, but I could hear them talking angrily afterward. I heard my name several times, followed by creative curse words. I knew this wasn't over. Sure enough, the next day the harassment started. I came home from grocery shopping to find someone parked in my assigned spot. When I knocked on their door to ask them to move, they pretended not to be home even though I could hear them inside. I could hear the tall one telling his friend to just ignore me and maybe I'd go away. I had to park 3 blocks away and carry groceries and my baby all that distance. Then they started playing loud videos right up against our shared wall during the day. Not music, but like action movie explosions and car crashes on repeat. My son couldn't nap, which meant he was cranky all evening. The parties got worse too. They'd invite dozens of people over and party until 4 in the morning. My baby would wake up crying, my husband couldn't sleep, and I was exhausted trying to manage everything. After a week of this, I called our landlord. I explained that I was his tenant in Unit 12 and was having serious noise issues with the new tenants next door. The landlord told me he didn't have time to mediate between tenants. He said they paid good rent, higher than most, and if I had a problem with them, I should handle it myself. When I tried to mention noise ordinances and lease agreements about disturbing other tenants, he said I should figure it out because he had bigger problems to deal with. Then he hung up on me. I was furious but also determined. If I had to handle it myself, then that's exactly what I'd do. I went online and found the biggest, most powerful speakers I could afford. When they arrived, my husband helped me position them right against our shared wall. He asked what my plan was, and I told him we were going to give them a taste of their own medicine. That night, they had another massive party. Music blasting, people yelling, the whole 9 yards. My son had learned to sleep through it by now since he was exhausted from not napping during the day. My husband and I waited. Around 4 a.m. the music finally stopped and we could hear people leaving. We waited another 30 minutes to make sure they were settling down to sleep. Then I turned on our speakers and started playing the most obnoxious children's songs I could find. Baby Shark on repeat, The Wheels on the Bus, all at maximum volume. My son woke up and was absolutely delighted. He started clapping and singing along. My husband was grinning from ear to ear. Within minutes, there was aggressive pounding on our wall. The tall guy was yelling at us to turn that garbage off right now. I shouted back that I couldn't hear him over the music, then turned it up even louder. About an hour later, there was pounding on our front door. The tall guy was demanding that we turn off that lame kitty stuff right now, or they were calling the cops. I told him to go ahead and call them, and that we'd just do what they did and turn it up louder. And that's exactly what I did. I cranked those speakers to 11. When the police showed up, it was the same officer from before. He took one look at the situation and started laughing. He asked me to confirm that they kept us up all night with loud parties, so we were returning the favor with children's music. I told him that was about the size of it. He went next door to talk to them. I could hear the conversation clearly. The officer told them that they were going to keep their music at reasonable levels from now on. or they were going to be arrested for disturbing the peace. He said I had been more than patient with them. The tall guy protested that I was playing annoying music too, but the officer explained that I was playing it during daytime hours after they had kept my family up all night. He told them to consider it a learning experience. You'd think that would be the end of it, but these guys were too entitled to learn their lesson. The very next morning, my husband was leaving for work when the tall guy confronted him in the parking lot. He told my husband that his wife was a real piece of work. My husband tried to keep things peaceful, saying we just wanted to coexist and asking them to keep their music down at night while we keep ours down during the day. The guy told my husband that we should mind our own business. Then he shoved my husband hard. My husband stumbled backward but didn't fight back. He's a teacher, and any kind of altercation could cost him his job. He said he didn't want any trouble, but the guy wasn't done. He threw a punch that caught my husband in the shoulder, then another that grazed his jaw. The shorter guy was standing nearby recording the whole thing on his phone. He was cheering his friend on, saying they should teach the teacher a lesson and that this was going straight on social media. My husband managed to get to his car and drive away, but he called me immediately. He told me I needed to call the police right now because the neighbor had just assaulted him, and his friend had recorded it. I was livid. Noise complaints were one thing, but putting hands on my husband crossed every line. When the police arrived, I showed them the bruise forming on my husband's jaw and explained what happened. The officer asked if anyone had witnessed it, and I told them that the other neighbor had recorded it on his phone. That's when things got really interesting. The officers went to question both guys. When they asked to see the phone recording, the short guy got nervous and tried to delete it, but the officers had already seen him holding it, and tampering with evidence made things much worse for him. It turned out the tall guy was arrested for assault and battery. But here's where it gets really good. When they ran the short guy's information, they discovered he was on probation for drug possession. Recording his friend committing assault while making threatening comments violated his probation terms. The short guy protested that this was just a misunderstanding, and they were just having fun. The officer told him that recording his friend assault someone while making threats wasn't having fun. It was aiding and abetting, and he was in violation of his probation. Both of them were taken away in handcuffs. The tall guy made bail after a few days, but the short guy was stuck in jail because of the probation violation. Within a week, we got a notice that they were being evicted for violating their lease terms, regarding disturbing other tenants and criminal activity on the property. Apparently, our landlord wasn't so hands-off when criminal charges were involved, and his property was at risk. We ended up moving out a few months later when we found a better place, but I heard from other tenants that the apartment next door still hasn't been rented out. Word got around about the thin walls and the drama, and nobody wants to deal with it. I moved to this country in early 2008 with my husband and our one-year-old daughter. I was pregnant with our second child then. We came here looking for a better life like so many others do. My husband found work in the fields, putting in long days, sometimes 60 to 70 hours a week, just to make ends meet. Everything changed when we'd only been here about 6 months. My husband was driving to work one morning when another car ran a red light and hit him. He died instantly. Suddenly, I was alone in a foreign country with a toddler and a baby on the way, barely speaking the language, and with no idea how I was going to survive. I had to do something fast. I found a job at a local donut shop and cafe downtown. At first, I thought I'd gotten lucky. Most of the workers there were immigrants like me, so I didn't feel so alone. The owner told me I could work as many hours as I needed, which sounded perfect since I desperately needed the money. But it didn't take long to realize something was very wrong with this place. The owner only hired people without proper documentation. He made that clear from day one. During my first week, he called me into his office and laid out his rules. He told me he was doing me a favor by giving me the job. He said if I worked hard for him, he would take care of me. But if I caused any problems, he would make one phone call to immigration, and I would be on a bus back to where I came from. I nervously agreed to his terms. He then explained that I would work 48 hours a week, 6 days a week. He said he didn't believe in paying overtime, so I shouldn't ask for it. There would be no sick days and no vacation days. He made it clear that if I didn't show up when scheduled, I wouldn't work there anymore. I needed the job too badly to argue. For months, I worked those long hours for regular pay, even though I knew something felt wrong about it. The other workers and I would whisper about it sometimes, but we were all too scared to do anything. Then my friend from church told me I should talk to her neighbor, who knew about labor laws. I was terrified, but I was also exhausted and barely making enough to keep my kids fed. Her neighbor explained that what my boss was doing was completely illegal. She said he was violating Department of Labor regulations by not paying overtime. She told me he was counting on my fear to keep me quiet. When I worried about immigration deporting me and my children, she said it was a risk, but that what he was doing was wrong. She said my co-workers and I deserved to be paid fairly for our work. I went home that night and looked at my two little ones sleeping. I thought about how hard their father had worked, how he'd never gotten to see his son grow up. I decided I had to be brave for them. The next day, I called the Department of Labor. A few weeks later, investigators showed up at the shop. The owner was furious, pacing around and glaring at all of us, trying to figure out who had called them. But the investigators were thorough. They went through all the time records and found that the owner owed us over $27,000 in unpaid overtime. The investigators made him sign an agreement to pay us all the back wages by a certain date. I was so relieved. My share was over $3,000, more money than I'd ever seen at once. But then came the day we were supposed to get our checks. The owner called us into his office one by one. When my turn came, I was nervous but excited. He handed me my overtime check for $3,300. He then told me he needed me to sign the back of the check so he could photocopy it for the Department of Labor records. That seemed reasonable, so I signed it. He made a copy, then handed the original back to me. But then, right in front of me, he fed my check into the paper shredder. He casually said there seemed to be a problem with the check, but not to worry because he would get me another one soon. When I asked what happened to my money, he leaned forward and told me to listen carefully. He said if anyone complained to the government about this, he would make sure immigration came for all of us. He threatened that we would all be deported and our kids would end up in foster care. Then he told me to get back to work. I was shaking when I left his office. I watched as he did the same thing to every single one of my co-workers. We all stood there in shock, but nobody said anything. We were too scared. That night, I cried harder than I had since my husband died. I called my friend's neighbor sobbing. I told her how he had shredded our checks and asked what I was going to do. I explained that I needed that money for rent and food for my kids. She was furious and told me that this man was going down. She said not to worry about calling anyone myself because she would handle it. She told me she'd read about our case in the local newspaper when the Department of Labor first investigated, so she had all the information she needed. She called the state office and got transferred to the original investigators. The investigators were shocked when they heard what happened. They told her they'd never seen anything so brazen. The owner had actually sent them photocopies of the signed checks, while the real checks were sitting in pieces in his trash can. Usually, these things take forever to resolve. But apparently, what our boss did was so outrageous that the federal government moved quickly. Within 2 months, a grand jury handed down a 10-count indictment against him for fraud and willful failure to pay overtime. The charges were serious. The fraud charges alone carried up to 5 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. When his lawyer explained what he was facing, he tried to make a deal. But the prosecutors weren't interested in being lenient. At the sentencing hearing, the judge didn't hold back. He told the owner that he had exploited vulnerable workers who were already in a difficult situation. The judge said he had threatened them with deportation to cover up his crimes and showed complete contempt for the law and for basic human decency. The judge then sentenced him to 5 years in federal prison. The owner's face went white. His wife was crying in the back of the courtroom. But I felt nothing but relief. After he went to prison, his wife took over the business. She was completely different from her husband, fair, respectful, and legal. She made sure we all got our back pay plus interest. None of us were deported. We all kept our jobs. A few years later, in 2016, I became a United States citizen. I'll never forget standing in that courthouse, raising my right hand, and taking the oath. I thought about my husband and how proud he would have been. I've since remarried a wonderful man who treats my children like his own. I left the donut shop and now work as a secretary at a local company, making more money than I ever dreamed possible. My kids are doing great in school, and they're both fluent in English and Spanish. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.